Hey guys, it's BlockchainBrad, and today I'm very excited and honoured to speak with Hycon, which is a very up-and-coming project in Korea. No doubt you'd know it's obviously a blockchain project, and we have three very important executive speakers who represent the company. We firstly have Jason French. So Jason, thank you so much, mate, for being on the channel.
My pleasure. Thanks for having us.
And in the centre we have Owen DELAHOY. Thank you, Owen, mate. And finally we have Niall Moore. Thank you, mate, for being on the channel.
Cheers. Thanks for having us.
So obviously, guys, Hycon is a very up-and-coming and exciting project. It's had a lot of information and certainly a lot of hype in recent past, and there's probably real reasons why. To explain that further, we have these gentlemen to really unpack what Hycon is all about. So before we do that, let's find out about the three of you. Let's start with you, Niall. You know, you're a bit famous. You've already been on a few YouTube videos I've seen. Can you tell us a bit more about you, though, and why you're an asset to the team?
I guess I got a background in astrophysics and computer science, so that and kind of a general interest in coding since I was quite young. Okay. And it's more about just kind of bringing my experience and kind of skill set to the team, helping out, kind of directing the other smarter people than me how to do things.
You're clearly modest. You're obviously a serious asset with your, I guess, technical skills and scientific skills. What about you, Owen? You're sitting there quietly in the background. But I've seen you on video as well.
So I'm also a computer scientist. I spend a lot of my time reading white papers and trying to understand a lot of the research, and then explaining that to some of the engineers who are great engineers but not so familiar with blockchain. Okay, awesome. And finally, what about you, Jace?
I bring a bit of I guess, a corporate background to the team. I spent about five and a half years in a couple of major companies here, multinationals. In communications and business development, and I've kind of taken that skill set to help bring the team, more international here out of South Korea.
Awesome, and it's great to see some representation from the West in the team itself, and it's a fantastic privilege to be able to speak fluently in English. I really appreciate that. So let's unpack now Hycon itself. Obviously, that's the reason why we're all here. It states on your website that you are powering hyperconnections for the blockchain solutions. Now, that's obviously a mouthful, and we're hearing a lot about these hyperconnective blockchain entities emerging now. So firstly, what are you in a nutshell, and what sets you apart? Let's start with you, Jace. You're the business rep.
Well, what I think really sets us apart is our goal is to make something that's kind of scalable from the onset. So we want more transactions per second, faster confirmation times, and low transaction confirmation cost. That's the main goal from the beginning. Okay,
so that's what you want, but let's talk about what you are, and that in terms of enterprise solutions. How do we unpack this in terms of an explanation of what essentially you are?
Perhaps maybe one of the developers could talk about what exactly that means. Okay. What I'm kind of getting at.
Yeah.
For our project Hycon, I was reading a lot of the research about why blockchain is not as fast as other technologies or more centralized technology. So you find that about 5 to 10 transactions per second on a network, and this is largely due to the block time or the block size. Some debate between Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin about how to improve the scalability of it. But we decided to take a different approach. Instead of having just a straight chain, we want to allow the chain to fork out and then come back together and resolve conflicts that would be in the ledger at that point.
Okay.
So this basically this makes the software much more tolerant to latency on the network and allows for a much faster block time. So
essentially, you are, in a nutshell, you're a scaling solution for a much wider and more vast marketplace.
That's what Hycon is, and our parent company, BlockchainBrad, intends to use Hycon to develop the Infinity platform. Yeah, we're going to talk about that definitely. But thanks for the encapsulate there. If we could extend that now across, Niall, you perhaps could explain this a bit further with regard to what you are as a digital asset in the context of the Infinity project, because obviously there's a lot more to you than just the first phase. So what essentially is this Infinity project, and why is it important?
It's kind of an encapsulating project for all the things that we're trying to do here. Most important and the foundational layer is our blockchain, which is Hycon is not just a token, it's more like a proof of concept of the underlying technology. It allows us to show that we can build this scalable solution with high transactional throughput and quick confirmations. In future, if we were applying it to like an enterprise solution, it wouldn't necessarily have to be financial transactions going. You can have the same number of transactions and it could be something else. And that's what this platform would be moving forward. It would be an enterprise solution using the underlying technology that we're building now for Hycon.
Okay, so essentially right now we're talking about first phase. And if you could imagine for a moment perhaps layers, or in terms of your approach, is that a good analogy to utilize something like that?
Yeah, I would think so. You'd be looking at Hycon as it currently is as being like the underlying foundational layer, and then the Infinity platform would be like a service layer built kind of on top of that.
Okay, so obviously that's part of your roadmap, and no doubt you're looking at a very longitudinal process. But let's talk about now the solutions. So Owen, just for reference as well, mate, if you want to come forward a little bit so we can hear you better. But certainly with regard to every great project, you have a premise, and you see problems within preceding blockchains, and certainly even in traditional markets. So what is the fundamental things you're trying to solve with Hycon?
So I really think that we're trying to solve scalability and also confirmation time. At the moment, when you send a transaction on Bitcoin, if there's a lot of other people trying to do it, you're going to be in a queue waiting for your transaction to get in, unless you're willing to pay a very high fee. We're hoping by adding a lot more scalability, we can have much higher throughput of transactions and reduce the fees as a result.
I see.
And also, we'd like to have much quicker confirmation times.
Right.
At the moment, if you send something on Bitcoin, you're going to wait 10 minutes for another block to come in. And if that hasn't arrived yet, you can't be confident that that transaction has made it into the ledger.
Okay.
So it's not possible to use this, for example, at the point of sale. You're never going to replace something like Visa card with Bitcoin at the moment.
Okay, and that's an absolutely fair point, and we've moved away anyway from the original iterations of blockchain. We're now talking discussions of enterprise, and that's certainly not the context for Bitcoin. But in this discussion, Owen, you mentioned scalability as the fundamental. Right now, in 2018, we're talking about scalability at a degree we've never seen, and certainly you would have heard the numbers being thrown out that are quite significant, and some of them ridiculous, and some of them entirely plausible. So what do you say to that when you know right now that there are other emerging blockchains taking it really seriously?
So I see a lot of really large claims, and not necessarily incorrect, but it might be that there's several chains running in parallel. There might not be a fast way to interact between those chains.
Right.
So sometimes the numbers can be truthful but misleading.
Right.
And I think we'll have to wait and see what projects emerge and how they're used, and then I think we'll start to see how useful they are.
I see. So the tech will talk, essentially. So in a nutshell, just in the reference, you're trying to improve your throughput, reduce the latency, and improve your bandwidth and size and efficiency. But let's talk about your forkability with respect to your design. Unforkable or forkable?
It's like any distributed system. If you wanted to fork it, you could just pick a block and fork from it and write your own layer of the protocol.
Okay.
The thing about our structure is that it will not unintentionally fork, because the DAG structure is designed to have these little forks in the chain and to be able to consolidate that.
So does that concern you, given the history we've seen with Bitcoin?
Not really, because we've designed it from the ground up. That's been the goal, to have that as part of the design rather than something we have to deal with accidentally.
Okay, so what's the main benefit of that then?
It allows for us to reduce the time between blocks, essentially. So we can have numerous blocks published in a very short period of time, because we don't have to actually worry about the propagation of the blocks around the network.
Okay.
We don't have to worry about one block getting to one node before they've published a block. It doesn't really matter. That node could publish a block, and we can consolidate with that later using the consensus algorithm.
That problem's and resolved by an algorithm on SPECTRE, as opposed to Bitcoin, where we have to wait until the problem is resolved.
Yeah, and obviously we haven't resolved the issue with the original iterations of blockchain. We haven't seen confirmation times really that improve significantly, and obviously there's still a lot of issues to be resolved in that respect. But if we could talk now about your core goals of infinity itself. You have them finitely addressed in your white paper. Let's start with your market need. You know, why are these goals so important?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. So we're talking about your infinity core goals. So
yeah.
We're looking at the 5 core goals that you have, and the first one's market need. Why are these so important, mate?
Oh, well, I mean, if you look at that, I mean, basically what we did when we envisioned the Infinity project is we looked at the existing inherent limitations or difficulties of blockchain. Mm-hmm. Either they were too slow to use for, you know, everyday point of sale transactions, or they were too expensive, or they were too difficult to implement into, say, an enterprise solutions. Mm-hmm. So, you know, that was really the core of the genesis of the project. It was, how can we create something that is going to be easy enough to use, that's going to be something that people will want to use because it works quick enough and it's cheap enough to transact in. So that was really where we started from, like the entire vision of the project.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about now flexibility in 2 respects. One is currency and one is innovation. Why is this an imperative as well?
The currency thing, it's, as I said previously, it's more about showing a use case for the technology, and the most well-known use case in the world for blockchain is currently cryptocurrency. Right. Like Bitcoin, one that started it all. Even Ethereum, which is Ether is the token used to power the network, but it's still thought of as a cryptocurrency rather than for its true function. So that's kind of something that people are aware of, and it kind of helps us to bring attention to our platform or our technology rather than as an end in itself. And
Niall, what do you say with respect to that when you hear the argument of utility, or even security for that matter? We're hearing the conversation emerge right now, but often I guess in the dialect of blockchain, we talk about utility as the core function.
Utility, you know, you see a lot of the word utility thrown around a lot for, you know, utility tokens, which don't actually have any utility at all.
Not yet.
Because they are not securities.
That's right.
It's just another word for them. What we're trying to create is something that, as we've said, as Jason has said, is something that could be used as a means of payment, like a pure currency rather than something that's a token or a security. It's something that's designed to be used rather than...
So real world digital cash, essentially, on the blockchain.
Yeah, that's kind of what we're looking for.
Okay, let's talk about now, Owen, an exciting aspect of the core elements, and that is the decentralized exchange. These are certainly prevalent right now, and everyone's talking about the possibilities they provide for blockchains like you. So why would that be a good thing?
So I think from a technology point of view, we really want to do research into building a decentralized exchange and creating atomic swaps with our platform, so that our currency can be exchanged with any other currency, both on-chain without a third party.
Okay.
Because currently, a lot of centralized exchanges getting hacked and losing people's money. Even right now, because I like to trade, some of my money is inside a Korean exchange. And it's terrifying to think that this company holds my private key. If something gets forked, like Bitcoin to Bitcoin Cash, I might not receive the forked currency, or they might get hacked and lose my currency. I have to put a lot of trust into that. Right. But if I am able to take my private keys and use it in a decentralized way, that reduces the need for trust.
I see, and it's also a much more secure sort of system as well, and it interoperates with other blockchains, which is even better. If we could talk about now these keywords with regard to, you know, your design, that is your speed. I want to talk about that, and also your frictionless nature. You know, maybe we could start with you, Jason, in terms of let's address just how fast you really are.
So, you know, this is an interesting question, right? We get this all the time, and you kind of referred to it earlier as well. So, you know, we speak with the devs pretty much every day, and our approach has been less hyperbolic, I guess you could say, where, you know, we are giving numbers that are, I think, numbers that we are very comfortable that we can guarantee as a worst case minimum. But then if you actually look at the uppercase in good conditions, you know, the speeds are quite high. So we don't like to give the ultimate perfect case, you know, scenario, which I've seen a number of companies go on stage and say, hey, we can do X amount of transactions per second, but you know, nobody can verify that. You can't prove that, and you've never seen that in the real world, but they say it. So I guess maybe Niall could talk a bit more on the actual numbers, because I know at a 1 megabit per second connection, it's 100 transactions per second.
The transactions, they will be bandwidth limited rather than any other limits. So, you know, with a specific transaction size, there's only so many transactions you can actually fit down a pipe.
Right. And
so if you a lot of bandwidth, then you know you can fit a lot of transactions.
Right, and obviously you want to build that bandwidth out. And what I respect about your approach is you're not going down the numerical path. You're not giving out these numbers because they'll change. But what is interesting is the functionality, the purpose of the numbers. So you seem very confident that you're going to address the need more so as you build out your bandwidth and as you build out your scalability. You know, if we compare that to Visa, for example, as long as you serve the need of the market, are you confident you can do that?
I think so. I think we're building based on the requirements we kind of set out for ourselves in the beginning, and we're confident that we're going to hit those requirements. Right,
and I think, you know, so yeah, full respect for not telling me the numbers. I appreciate that. It doesn't happen every day. If we could talk about now your frictionless nature in terms of, you know, your latency tolerance and your DAG structure, we'll talk about that. What is this frictionless reference?
It comes down to looking at the block propagation problem that I mentioned earlier. With the DAG structure, you can allow for blocks to be published from anywhere on the network without them necessarily having to be the next block in the chain. So they can match on to several previous blocks that have been published, and they'll reference them, and it forms kind of a web.
Right.
So it doesn't matter if your network topography is all over the place. It doesn't matter if you've got, you know, say, a node in South America publishing one block and a node in Russia publishing another block. Those blocks can travel around the network and still be included in the chain without the miners having to run the risk of losing their reward, and without the people who've made the transactions having to wait longer for their transactions to be included.
I see. So essentially it's more chaotic in its design and it's much more spread out. But I remember listening to you also, Niall, in a previous video, and you made the point that it's not so much the DAG itself, it's what it can do for your blockchain in terms of its benefits. So what would you say is the fundamental benefit of having the DAG?
The fundamental benefit is that it allows for this disordered nature to occur, which we can consolidate later using a consensus algorithm, rather than focusing the linear structure on the blocks from the get-go.
Okay. Well, let's talk about now, as you mentioned, it's non-linear, that's an advantage, but in the context of your consensus protocol as well, SPECTRE, you know, let's unpack that a little bit. And what is it specifically? Obviously, the DAG underpins it, but is there more to it than that?
So in a chain, it's really easy to tell which block came first and which block came later. But in a DAG, it looks like blocks were published simultaneously. Then it's you can't determine which one came first in real time. But by using SPECTRE, from the shape of the DAG, we can select which one came first in a way that the whole network can agree.
I see.
So the is maintaining consensus and choosing which one came first.
Okay, so let's talk about that in the context of other competitors in the space of, you know, let's get right down to consensus. We're seeing a lot of interesting consensus algorithms come out, like the ABFT, PBFT, BBFT, you know, the list goes on just in that respect. So did you really go to town on exploring the different options you had before you decided on the DAG?
So I think one of the most interesting projects that I was reading about before starting Hycon was Hashgraph. It's similar in some ways to a DAG, in that are many different, almost like chains, which are combined and resolved later. It seems like a good approach to scalability. I will be very interested to see how well their project progresses, but ultimately we decided not to use that approach.
Okay, that's a very fair response. I'm surprised you didn't really go to town on other algorithms, but yeah, I appreciate that. So
it don't inspire me so much. For example, IOTA. I was very, very keen on IOTA when I first heard about it, but I'm a little concerned that they haven't released all of their software, and we don't know exactly how IOTA does consensus. They do consensus in a closed source system. We don't know how it does it.
And that's the biggest irony, I suppose, and also there's many millions with you, Owen. Many of us also are left wondering what is actually going on. If we could talk now about use cases, because that's probably, as Niall's alluded to, is one of the most important things in any blockchain project, is the actual use case. So in that respect, tell us a bit more about how we apply this protocol in the real world.
I think one of the ones that we've been looking at, and I don't know if I've said in like some talks and Jason's mentioned as well, is you can use it like for payment on public transport. Here in Seoul, you've got like basically a card that you can top up, and you just tap it at the gate of the subway, and it charges you, and it's all done within seconds. Like that's something we would love to be able to kind of leverage and use Hycon for.
Okay, so that's one example. I'm sure you have many.
Yeah.
Integrations into, say, digital payments. Like digital payments, you may have seen the news out of South Korea. 6,000 merchants this week just announced that they're going to accept cryptocurrency for actual payments. So you're going to be able to use cryptocurrency payments in the real world. And of course, we would love to become one of those cryptocurrency payment options once the project is live. Basically giving people an option that's something that's fast enough, to and has a low enough transaction cost to actually use as an everyday payment system would be, one of our ideal goals. In terms of other utility, of course, as well, as Owen mentioned before, as something that can be used as a medium of exchange between currencies on top of a DEX. That would be another use case for the actual Hycon token itself. And finally, as Niall had mentioned earlier before, also providing with the Infinity platform, enterprise solutions on top of the blockchain as well. So, I mean, there are a ton of different use cases that, I guess whatever you could imagine.
Exactly. And when you couple that with enterprise, you also inherently link that to governments. And that's what we will talk about. I have listened to some of your discussions, and certainly with your CEO, there's been some very clear statements with regard to government connections. So we're talking about not only at the individual consumer level, we're talking about a fundamental business layer, but then even higher than that, we're talking about in state and nationwide, use cases and applications that across the board with an industry like in South Korea, we're seeing, significant potential for mass adoption. So let's talk about that in the context of Hycon. Just what is happening with regard to some of these fundamental connections that are being built out, especially when your CEO has been disclosing some of them already.
Yeah, so we have a number of projects with local governments in South Korea already. The most famous of which you probably heard us talk about before is the No1 district project that we have that's currently live and it's running. So we formed a partnership with the local government of No1 district here in South Korea, and I think it's got 3 to 5 million people living in that district.
Yeah, fairly big area.
Wow.
Yeah, they're a fairly progressive area of Seoul, and they were very interested in how to integrate a blockchain solution into their local economy, and that's something that we provided for them. Now, of course, as you know, Hycon is not actually a functioning mainnet yet, so we were not able to, put Hycon into that project. But the goal is to use that as a pilot project to, make the connections and get the experience for the team, so that in the future we could also roll out additional projects that might be able to run on top of the Hycon blockchain as a fork of another blockchain.
And Jace, no doubt you must be excited to be in a position where you're having discussions already, excuse me, and you're not even have a mainnet functioning. That's quite a feat. It really is. I speak with very few blockchain companies that have done this kind of thing at this scale this early on. So clearly your target market right now is more in South Korea first.
Yeah, of course. I mean, our target is not just South Korea, but we are based in South Korea, and our CEO is a Korean national, of course. So we've got a really strong network in South Korea. And one thing I could tell you is that our CEO Taewon Kim has been a blockchain evangelist for probably 5 straight years now, and he's been lecturing and talking and just meeting anybody he can. To talk about blockchain, about the positive, potential of blockchain, and through his time, he's really built good connections with industry and with government across South Korea. So we think that that's a natural starting point to launch some of these projects. So we've also, I think we have another project that we can announce with the Yeongdeung-po district. It's another district in South Korea as well that's currently under work, or it's under progress as well. On top of other districts in South Korea, so not just in Seoul. So we have another partnership with the city of Daegu, which is Korea's 3rd largest city, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a great launching pad for these types of projects. And the goal is that other local governments could also see the success cases of these in South Korea, and then we could perhaps look to export that to other markets.
Okay. Now, one thing I did want to ask you, and this is the perfect opportunity I rarely get. You're all three of you are from other countries. You're certainly not from South Korea. What is the benefit of really building out something of this scale in the Asian belt, particularly in South Korea, with one of the most prolific consumers of cryptocurrency right now?
Well, to be honest, this is the perfect place to be. I mean, if you look at the fervor going on in the cryptocurrency market, and you've got a government that's actually warming up to cryptocurrency, we're probably going to see some clarity on the regulations this year. There was some kind of misinformation in the past about the ban on ICOs, which actually never happened. And then, anyway, there's a lot of misinformation, but I can tell you that there's a lot of action happening in the cryptocurrency blockchain space, and a lot of positive feelings. And Korea is also one of the most connected countries in the planet, and in terms of internet speed and the mobile phone penetration rate. I mean, everybody's on a smartphone here, and people are
4G,
very
LTE everywhere.
Yeah, and I'm really glad we're talking about that, because it's not something we're privy to all the time. But just how imperative is that technological connection to this kind of industry that you're trying to build?
Well, it's absolutely critical. Yeah, it's absolutely critical, because it's similar with WeChat in China. A lot of people don't realize people are already very comfortable in using digital payment systems, where in maybe some other countries were less comfortable with that. And we're talking like, people of all age groups, that including grandmothers, that go onto these.
Pay or whatever they.
Yeah, Alipay is the buzzword when it comes to
But here in South Korea, they've got Kakao, which is basically the same thing, and everything's integrated into one platform. People just do online shopping, and they make digital payments with their fingerprints now, thanks to technology. So it's a very tech-forward and tech-friendly place to be, which is a great place to explore new types of options, such as cryptocurrency and blockchain solutions.
Right, and here you are, with Hycon, one of the leading blockchain projects and entities in South Korea. So that must be exciting. We will talk about some that exist there in South Korea alongside you. But for now, let's talk, Owen, about mining. Obviously, there's a mining process. There's even a protocol that you have, the Kryptonite protocol, and another one coming, the proof of space, I think it is.
So I don't think we intend to implement proof of space.
Okay.
But it was used as an example in our white paper to show other methods of mining.
Okay.
Because we're open to considering things other than proof of work. Overall, I like proof of work because it means that to generate the currency, you actually need to expend some physical currency to pay for your electricity bill. So you can quantify Bitcoin, for example. You can say it costs at least $8,500 to make a Bitcoin. It varies as the difficulty changes. But yeah, I think in that respect, I like proof of work. But one of the concerns with something like Bitcoin is all of the ASIC machines, which has centralized mining into huge warehouses of computers which are just mining Bitcoin for one company. And so all of this hash power means that one entity has a lot of influence over the publishing of blocks. So given that concern, we wanted to choose a hash algorithm which would be quite difficult to develop an ASIC for. So we chose Kryptonite. Sadly, after we announced this, Bitmain also announced that they were going to release an ASIC for Kryptonite.
Right. Okay.
So Monero, who's another great currency, who are doing a lot of research into privacy on the chain, they've decided that they're going to constantly change Kryptonite every 6 months to try and prevent any ASIC from being useful. This has also been the approach from coins like Vercoin, who are going to constantly change their hash algorithm, Lyra. And I think that is the approach that we're going to have to take if we're going to continue to use proof of work.
Well, what's good is that you have these examples. You've seen some others leading the way that you can, assess and then see what viability options there are there. But mate, if we could also, you alluded to some security issues. One of the things I did have a look at is your wallet. You have a very well-designed wallet facility coming on board. So what's happening with the Hycon wallet right now?
With the wallets, we basically just looked at industry standards and basically implementing them. so that our wallets will be able to be implemented by, say, third-party providers like Jax or something. So people wouldn't have to specifically use a Hycon wallet. Hycon could be integrated into like several other providers, and people could just use it straight out of the box.
Okay.
So by implementing the standards, like, we feel that's the best way to kind of promote, again, more usage.
Okay. So really, again, it's an agnostic approach, making sure that you build out the access rather than have something that's centralized.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk now about one of the fun topics for the audience, and that is money. Let's talk about the tokenomics. Obviously, you're in the process now of your ICO. You've moved out of the private and the pre-sale, approaching the crowd sale. So let's get stuck into the what's of that. What's happening and when?
One of my concerns with a currency that's going to be mined so heavily is that when you look at something like Bitcoin, most of the currency was released in a very short amount of time. In the first 10 years, I think we've released 80% of Bitcoin is now available, or 85%.
Right.
So it means a huge inflation in the number of coins in a very short time. So in our mining distribution schedule, we've tried to keep that much slower, so that it's a much slower rollout of coins.
Right. I'm really glad you mentioned that, because let's get down to the exact numbers. In fact, you've reserved 70%, which is the highest I've ever seen for public mining.
Yeah, that was kind of a goal, like, from the CEO then, in the beginning when we were designing the tokenomics. He wanted it to be mineable so that we could have distribution to everybody, essentially, and have it be like accessible to as many people as possible.
We don't want all of the currency to be held by a small number of individuals.
I see, and also obviously you're trying to build out this egalitarian, for want of a better word, design. And in doing so, you've also only allocated 5% for your team. So why is that the case?
I guess for those of us that have been around in the space for a long time, you can look back in time and you see in the old days, I guess you could call it only a few years ago, but
yes.
It's not that uncommon to see 20, 30, or even sometimes higher than that percent of all the tokens go to the team, which I think is, it can be problematic. It also incentivizes a team to, try to make something and build something great, but at the same time, I think it's not maybe the best use case for that many tokens. And I think of a project of our size, though, 5% is still more than enough to properly incentivize and reward people for building something that is great. So to us, that just seemed like the fair amount when we were designing the tokenomics. I know a lot of projects still do more, and I've seen a few that have done a little bit less, but that seemed to be about the right spot for given the size of our team and what we're trying to accomplish here.
Once again, I agree with you. I think it is a very fair model. With regard to the investors, I wanted to ask you specifically, given that you have moved from your private and your pre-sale, is all of this process, including your crowd sale, included in the 10%? Because you allocated 10% for your investors.
Yeah,
that's correct.
So once again, that's a small number, considering that's the whole gamut of investors.
I think my response to that would be that it's a small number after everything has been mined. But the mining schedule is over 50 years. So it's going to be a small amount in 50 years' time. But at release, it will be all of the currency. The circulating supply will be a bigger percentage.
And Owen, let's talk about stability. One of the things we tend not to see enough of is the stability and natural progression of value in the blockchain right now. We're seeing very manipulated marketplaces. With the gradual release of your tokens, is it not fair to say that this will improve the stability of not just our Hycon, but also its tokenomics and its token particularly?
I think things that really affect the fluctuation of value of the cryptocurrency is you have one entity holding a lot of the coin and deciding to sell it at that time, or somebody with a lot of money coming in and buying a lot of it.
Right.
By trying to distribute it between as many participants as possible, that should help reduce the number of whales and the amount of fluctuation.
Right. And I'm glad we're talking about this. Let's talk about that in the context of some excellent theoretical blockchains. And I say that very carefully because we haven't yet seen their utility. But no question, like yourselves, there's some excellent white papers out there. But unfortunately, regardless of that, we're seeing manipulations happen to the detriment of the tech potential. Have you noticed that in the market?
I mean, I guess the easiest way to answer that is that nobody's in control of the forces of the market. I mean, right now, the fluctuations in the cryptocurrency market worldwide for basically all currencies, it's actually decreasing. I've seen a number of studies that shows like that it's actually getting smaller,
right.
But still that getting smaller doesn't mean that it's not large comparatively to, say, a stable fiat currency
right,
right now. So, you know, we can only take certain measures, as Owen has mentioned before, that you know, we can do our best to try to have wide dispersion, distribution. You know, the mining schedule as well should help to perhaps you know, reduce fluctuations. But I mean, like any other cryptocurrency that will be traded publicly, you know, we cannot control you know, the fluctuations of the market.
Sure, I certainly appreciate that, but this is cryptocurrency. It's quite a unique and volatile market space now, but yes, you are right. If we could talk now about some of your recent events. You know, if you go through your Twitter scroll, you go through your Telegram, there's a lot happening for you right now. Just if we even talk about Hong Kong, for example, things like your new team videos and new anthems even. You know, what's happening in the Hycon space right now?
Well, I mean, we've got a number of things that we've done and a number of things that we're planning. Just recently, as you said, we made a big, we'll say a big splash in Hong Kong because we figured it was the right place and the right time, considering the main crowd sale is going live tomorrow. So, you know, Token 2049 was a really, really well done conference that had some of the biggest names and some of the best thinkers in the blockchain space. So it attracted a lot of really interesting people that, you know, you want to be networking with, of course. So we, during that week, we co-hosted a blockchain industry professional panel where our CEO actually dialed in from South Korea and joined a very distinguished panel, list of guests on this panel. And then we had about 10 people in Hong Kong to make sure that we were, maybe 11, yeah, to make sure that we really were, you know, getting around and speaking to as many people as we can. Letting people know about Hycon. We were also one of the official sponsors of 2049, and then we decided to cap off Token 2049 with our own party to kind of you know, say thank you to the community and the network that we had made there, and to really just get the word out about Hycon. Because, you know, one of the things that's been really interesting from a marketing perspective is actually we've had enough like a lot more organic growth than maybe we actually expected, and we haven't had to really, let's say, spam people's Instagram and Facebook. And, you know, that's a goal of ours from the beginning. We didn't want to be the project that's just like spending $1 million on marketing. So, you know, that's been our goal from the beginning, is to create as much organic growth as we can. So Token 2049, the week in Hong Kong, that was, you know, the first time we've really kind of made a big,
splash. That's what it said on the article.
Yeah, I think that was the word, right? Yeah, that was the first time we, you know, kind of said, hey, here we are, guys, you know, to the world. So,
and to be honest, we appreciate that natural progression, that kind of organic process of media, so that it, once again, it becomes more natural, as it should be. And there's no hype, no intention of hype. But in that respect, let's talk about another company very briefly. I won't be going in detail, who did a similar approach. Has a very similar name to you, in fact, and that's Hycon. But I only want to reference this for one reason. I'm not going into detail as others have. Clearly, they have a different approach. They are going down the sidechain track. But I more wanted to ask you about the potential for interoperability, given that they are an interoperable blockchain architecture. Have you considered more of the commonalities, and have you considered more of the integration factor for projects like them?
I think when we start work on our deck, we're going to want to integrate as many currencies as possible and love to work with them.
Okay.
It's like the Korean blockchain space is actually quite small, so there will definitely probably some connections already between, say, our parent company and Hycon. So like there's definitely a possibility, like in the future, once, you know, I think there's enough room for everybody in the space.
Right.
You know, Brad, one thing that, you know, people always try to get us to say something about another project, or, you know, what do you think about them? What do you think about that? It's like, honestly, when another project does something good in the space, it's good for everybody.
Exactly.
So for us, it's like there's no competition directly. It's there's lots of great teams out there, and we wish the best of luck to all of them. Honestly,
I think the illusion I'm making is more so they are reaching out to governments, hospitals, as you know, they are sincerely making some positive moves, and no doubt you're in a space, you're situated in the same area, same city, in fact. So clearly, it's in your interests to go and make connections of like nature. So just purely from a tech position, wanted to know whether or not there was considerations for working collaboratively, or whether that was possible in the future.
I don't see any reason that that is good.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, now if we could talk about briefly the legislation, law, and even the counter with a lot of the FUD that happens, particularly in Korea. KYC, AML, what's the landscape like in terms of sentiment, particularly from the government?
Well, I kind of alluded to it earlier. Actually, it's actually quite positive. There's been a bit of a 180, so to speak. Like most governments, the Korean government was in an impossible situation, right? Because go back maybe about a year from now, in the past, there was a lot of great projects. There were a lot of great projects, but there were also a lot of scams. So then, what happens is the government's getting complaints from too many people saying, hey, I was scammed. And so they're thinking, well, we have to protect the people. But at the same time, nobody wants to be the government that then hampers the production or the development of this industry, which could be one of the biggest growth engines moving forward, which a lot of us believe will be. So I think, what happened was somebody made a statement here in South Korea that was a bit boisterous, and actually the Western media picked up on it, and we saw on Forbes and all sorts of different Western media that ICOs are banned, cryptocurrency is going to be banned, and everything's in South Korea. But actually, what happened was one government official said they're considering a ban, and then that was it. So it actually was banned, and recently we've seen in the news that the Korean government is planning to release regulations this year. So instead of banning it, it will be regulated, and I think that's actually a really good sign. So on top of that, actually, we've already seen some regulations come into the space. So to kind of cool down the market here, the trading market, the government put in some of the strictest KYC, AML restrictions and regulations for anybody who wants to trade in South Korea. Okay. And I think that's actually not a bad thing, to be honest. It definitely cooled down the market. It got rid of some of the speculative trading and some of the maybe unwanted trading that might have been happening. And I think that's a positive step, honestly.
So essentially, what we're seeing, or what you're particularly seeing being there, is that the government, from their standpoint, they're taking crypto and more importantly blockchain very seriously as a technology for the future, for infrastructure and for business.
Well, what I'm seeing is the government is really trying to support blockchain as a technology, but at the same time, they really want to regulate cryptocurrency. Right.
So well said.
It's like kind of two different kind of sides of the same coin. They're like they do the regulation to protect people from themselves, even from the rampant speculation. Sure. At the same time, they see the potential of blockchain technology.
A nice pun thrown in there with the coin. But if we could talk about that in the world context, as well, we're seeing that happen. We're seeing right across the globe this exact same sort of position from governments. It's not just in South Korea. Everyone seems to be moving in this direction of regulation, even perhaps the proponents of cryptocurrency, because once again, it reaffirms the longitudinal position of cryptocurrency itself.
Yeah. Much to the chagrin maybe of some of the hardcore libertarians that were part of are definitely a big part of the space. I think we're not going to subvert governments. I think the best way forward is to actually find a way to work with them. And I think that's the quickest path to, real world adoption, and making real world use cases that people are going to start using in everyday life. Sure. I think that's probably the best way forward. But to be frank though too, is certain things like, Bitcoin, you can only regulate it to a certain degree. It's not really, you can't really regulate Bitcoin under one jurisdiction. You can only regulate what some of your citizens perhaps do with that, or how they trade with it, but you can't actually regulate it. So it's an interesting space. We'll have to see how the regulations unfold globally. I'm very interested in following.
And particularly given that the first design of blockchain was actually to do the antithesis of regulation, and we've now moved across, and often the case is with internet, for example, it's moved from initially a puristic decentralized model into something that's much more compatible with today's use case. And I would imagine that will happen in this process. Let's now talk about, gentlemen, your team. You have 15 members that are on your website. So firstly, I wanted to ask you, is that the whole team, or is there actually more involved that we don't see?
We have grown.
Yeah. I always wonder why you don't advertise the rest.
There are a few guys who haven't had their faces put up on the website yet. We've been going through like a concerted hiring effort to bring in more talent as much as possible to kind of grow the team.
So we brought in developers from the States.
Wow, that's
China,
expensive.
Korea, and we're also working on bringing a guy in from Europe. So I think we've hired 6 full-time developers in the last 6 weeks or so.
And that's the beauty of the ICO, is it allows you the funds to try and build out your team, your core team.
That's the whole point.
Right, and what's also fantastic is that you have 2 components to your team. So Owen, you could address this because I can barely hear you in the background. So Owen, you have a dev team and also a business team. People may not know that.
Yeah, so Jason is heading up our marketing and business side, and me and Niall are focusing on the technology.
Okay, so how many are in your dev team that we don't know?
That you don't know, there's probably 3 or 4 moments.
Honestly, they will be up on the website shortly, but with the main crowd sale going live tomorrow, there's been, and us being away for a week in Hong Kong, there have been other things that were more pressing, but they will be up on the website soon for everyone to meet.
Sure, and I appreciate your time, all 3 of you. On that note, if we want to find out more about Hycon, where could we go, gentlemen? What's the best sort of location to go and inquire, to become more informed, and most importantly, interact?
Our Telegram chat is probably the most active one. I think we've got over 12,000 members currently.
Excellent.
But as a caveat to that, though, like a lot of projects, we will be kind of ramping that down after the main crowd sale, because it's probably unrealistic to maintain 24/7 coverage worldwide. Once that's over. So we will create an announcements channel so everybody can follow along for all the main announcements. Of course, you can read about us on Medium, find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, pretty much every channal possible.
Subreddit.
Yeah, so I think, for example, if you want to talk tech, which we always welcome for any viewer out there, if you have a question, these guys love to interact and get into the weeds a little bit about the technology.
Right.
Please drop it. We have an ongoing AMA that's been going basically since the beginning of the project almost. And we try to interact as quickly as we can. You can email us. We're trying to be as visible as we can. We also attend a ton of blockchain conferences, both here in Seoul and around the world, because we want to continue to meet with people and answer questions. So.
Right. Well, we really appreciate that engagement, because often we see that some projects are so busy that they don't tend to, or perhaps there's language barriers, and clearly you've overcome that with gentlemen like yourselves who can speak quite fluently in English. So let's talk about you, Owen and Niall, with regard to not just quite fluently, you're native speakers, that does help. But Owen, obviously, you're tech savvy, it's your passion. Is there anything technological you wanted to address that perhaps I did miss?
No, the key points of the DAG and how that helps us to scale.
Right.
And I think covered that really well. So
thank you. No problem. And any other final statements, Niall, that you wanted to you can think of off the cuff, to perhaps address to the audience?
The audience, check out our social media channels, read our white paper. Hit us up if you want to hear more. Right.
Send us questions.
Brad, something I'd like to leave with all your viewers. If you could ask more questions about the technology, we love to talk about the tech. And I think in the space in general, we see too much speculation about maybe tokenomics and prices versus what people are actually trying to build, or what other projects are trying to build, including our project. So, we would love to get into deeper discussions about the technology itself.
Right. Well, that sounds like an invitation for, I guess, the next phase of an interview. We could possibly go much deeper into the tech, but it's really been a privilege to speak with you about the generic aspect of Hycon and what you stand for. No doubt you're planning on becoming a mainstay and a serious stakeholder in this industry in the future, particularly in South Korea, but no doubt you plan to evolve globally. So I wish you all the very best as you work diligently to do that. It's a huge project, huge undertaking, but no doubt you have an A-class team and a world-class team to lead the way. So on behalf of all the viewers who wanted to know more about Hycon, I sincerely appreciate your time. I respect you're very busy, and I'll let you get back to work. Once again, thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much. We appreciate it as well.
No worries.